Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. So we're doing this one, at least I am, from a different location. But regardless, we have a lot of news to get into, a lot of football talk today, and we're going to have a lot of NFL draft coming up. So that means we're diving into big boards. We're going to get into player evaluations. We're going to mock some players later on down the line. But today, what we're going to do is look at the positional needs for the teams that we cover: Jets, Giants, Bears, in that order. And then we will also go through on the players that we like them to take. But there was some big news already with the trade of Sam Darnold. We'll get into that in a second. But first of all, Swig, how are you doing?
I'm good, Dylan. Excited to be talking about the draft, man. It's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. Yeah, I care way too much about it, so I'm excited to start getting into it a little bit here. We're less than a month to go.
Yeah, the NFL draft is just such a fun time to be a sports fan, because if you're a big NFL fan, you want to see, oh, who's gonna go here, who's gonna go here. I like this team, I like this player, and there's just so much uncertainty because you don't even know what's gonna happen with certain players at certain spots that you're just like, oh my gosh, are they going to make a move like this, like the random Baker Mayfields that go number one on draft day that's rumored in the mornings? It's just those little things that make the draft so unbelievable. But anyway, today there was a trade. Sam Darnold has been dealt to the Carolina Panthers. I mentioned on the show before, the Panthers are going to try to go hard for a new quarterback. They ended up doing it. The Jets ended up getting a second, fourth, and a sixth, I believe. Future rounds, future picks on that one. But what do you think about the trade?
Yeah, man. I mean, Carolina has not made it a secret that they've been looking for a new quarterback, and we can dive into their side of this here in a minute. But from the Jets side, I'm not surprised at all. I don't think anyone should be. It's, to me, been clear as day that they're going to go for Zach Wilson with that second overall pick. I think that's been pretty evident ever since they screwed themselves by winning a game and fell from the first pick. So Wilson, nothing changes there. Since he's coming in, they were going to trade Darnold to a team that was desperate to take a chance on him. And when the Panthers, all of their other quarterback options either were off the board or somebody traded up in front of them, or the whole very dark, all of a sudden, Deshaun Watson situation, all of a sudden the Panthers were kind of running out of options. So the Jets, I think they got a pretty good return out of it, all things considered. They got the sixth round pick in this upcoming draft, and then the second and fourth round picks are in 2022. But I think the obvious comp here in recent years is when the Cardinals traded Josh Rosen to the Dolphins. And despite the fact that Rosen was even shittier than Darnold has been in his 1 year in Arizona, Arizona got a second round pick that ended up being number 62. So right at the end of the second round, and then a fifth rounder in last year's draft. The Jets did get a little bit more than that. And that second round pick in next year's draft probably will be a lot higher than 62nd overall.
Yeah, it will. And that's a good comparison there with Josh Rosen. I felt the same thing because he had to wait a little bit. He got drafted. I traded for a second rounder, and he was, like you said, he was a bad version of Sam Darnold. So I feel like they did end up getting the best value, but you have to make sure that this is the decision you believe in if you're Joe Douglas. Like, you see this Carolina connection. I know you said we'll get into them later, but they get Robbie Anderson back with Sam Darnold. But anyway, on the Jets side, what you're thinking here is, okay, how much do you believe in Zach Wilson? You have to believe wholeheartedly he's your franchise guy if you end up trading someone like Sam Darnold to Carolina or just in general. So you get him out of the AFC, which is good. But I see this as a potential match made in heaven for Sam Darnold and Joe Brady. But it's going to be something.
Well, the Jets, I mean, this second overall pick is what Joe Douglas is going to stake his legacy on right here. I mean, GMs are made or broken by the quarterback they end up selecting. They get their guy. Zach Wilson wowed everyone at his pro day at BYU. I think it was last week at the time of we're recording this. He has the arm talent. He has the ability to throw off platform. He's an exciting player who still needs a little bit of development, I would think, but he really burst onto the scene with an electric year at BYU. He's going to be their guy. He's a creative passer. I'm curious to see how the Jets use him, but they need to surround him with protection and playmakers, something they really ultimately failed to do with Sam Darnold, man. I mean, like, I'm not going to sit here, if we want to reflect on the Darnold era really quick. Darnold was far from perfect for the Jets, but the Jets did not do that man any favors, man. I mean, the offensive line in particular, They did eventually draft Mekhi Becton last year, but he alone does not make a good offensive line. Other than that, they were scraping the bottom of the dumpster to fill out their offensive line, and they were basically human turnstiles who got their quarterbacks and running backs annihilated as soon as they touched the ball. It's not a good situation for anybody. The Jets were a little bit more aggressive with playmakers the last couple of years, Le'Veon Bell, Jamison Crowder, Denzel Mims last year. But it's still, I mean, considering how bad that offensive line was, they had no chance of making a real impact. And we saw it in the Super Bowl with the Chiefs. If you don't have a good offensive line, you can only go so far, and your offense can only be so productive. And if the Jets surrounded Darnold with a good offensive line, he could look a lot better. But with the offensive line he was stuck behind, he looked like Ryan Lindley out there. It wasn't going to work out.
Yeah, that's that's pretty solid there. You talk about Ryan Lindley. That's a name I didn't think I'd be hearing today, but you never know what you're going to get here at the Big City Sports Podcast. But I think right now, you look at the quarterbacks on their roster. James Morgan. So that's it. That's literally it. So what I think priority number one now is, before you get Zach Wilson, is okay. You know for a fact, unless Jacksonville throws a curveball, which is highly unlikely, but you have to be aware of that scenario. I think you go out and sign a veteran backup quarterback that can help groom Zach Wilson just a little bit, because James Morgan's not the guy. I mean, there's no chance this guy's a backup quarterback, but someone like a potential Alex Smith, or someone that's been there before, a Matt Barkley that's helped a little bit in the development of someone like Josh Allen. And he's been around a little bit, but I feel like right now the focus needs to be shift to getting a veteran quarterback in the room that can help out the new quarterback in Zach Wilson.
Yeah, and that veteran guy can be brought on pretty much any time. It could be after the draft. I don't think there's necessarily a huge rush for that. They had Joe Flacco in that role last year, and he existed, and he's going to fill a similar role in Philadelphia. So the Jets can, find somebody on the scrap heap like that. I'm not too concerned. I agree that if they go in with Zach Wilson and James Morgan as their only two QBs, it's probably not a good idea. Understatement of the century. And no offense to James Morgan, he's a fourth round developmental QB, but having him be the full time only backup in year two behind a rookie QB is just stupid, which means it's something the Jets might be considering. They do have a lot of other needs, though, all over this roster. We'll get into that in a second. But it was clear that Douglas wanted to bring in his own guy at the quarterback position. It was clear that the Darnold marriage was not going to work out in New York, and that they were going to trade him to a team that was hoping to take a chance on his upside, which I do think is undeniable. It is there. Carolina ended up being that team. They, I think, overpaid a little bit for him, but we can get into the Panthers side here in a minute. But it ends a very rocky 3-year stretch, but Darnold gets away from Adam Gase finally, so it's not all bad.
Yeah, it's not bad. He does get away from Adam Gase. But you look at someone I think they could consider if they bring in a backup quarterback. Nick Mullins, he was with Robert Saleh in San Francisco. I know he's a defensive guy, but he's a sparky sort of quarterback that does little things like he'll be a decent backup, but maybe he's not the potential leader there, but he could be someone like that. But let's get into do you want to attack the Carolina side before we hit the later picks? Let's go to Carolina. What do you feel about their situation?
Yeah, we can definitely talk about it from the Panthers side, because I know I mentioned off pod before all the Watson stuff broke that I thought the Panthers were going to go for him. And they made it no secret that that's exactly what they were doing. But that situation turned really dark really fast. We'll see how it resolves. At the moment, it's at the point where nobody can make a move for him until we see how the legal process plays out. The Panthers, I'm sure we're hoping to either trade up in the draft or have one of the top 4, possibly 5 quarterbacks fall to them at the 8th overall pick. But then the 49ers traded up to number 3. And that essentially forced Carolina's hand, because it's no secret that unless something drastic happens between now and draft day, Trevor Lawrence is going 1, Zach Wilson is going 2. The Dolphins have no need to take a quarterback at number 3, so they traded out. We can get into that before in a more detailed draft episode. But basically, what that meant for Carolina is that third quarterback, they had no chance to trade up anymore, because Atlanta has the 4th pick, and they are a division rival of the Panthers, so they can't trade up and get whichever one of Fields, Wilson, Lawrence, and Trey Lance are available, right? So they can either reach big time for Mac Jones, or they could try to get somebody on the trade market. I understand what Carolina is doing here, but it's definitely a move that reeks of desperation for me. They panicked when their draft move did not work out, and their best case scenario is that Darnold has the same getaway from Adam Gase success that Ryan Tannehill has had in Tennessee the last couple seasons, and he has definitely improved and salvaged his career. What looked to be on the rocks in Miami, but he's not an upper tier elite quarterback either. So to me, it's somebody who might suffice for a year or two, be a minor upgrade over Bridgewater, but the bust potential here is also very high.
I disagree with that point. I'm gonna be 100% honest. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. You look at Sam Darnold going to the Carolina Panthers. I talked about a match made in heaven. Who is a quarterback that Joe Brady did really well with when he was in college? Joe Burrow. Burrow had that sort of success, someone that's a similar build, similar mindset of moving the ball the right way. I feel like Sam Darnold will bring that to this team. And you look at the division, the Bucks, yes, they're good now, but they're a ticking time bomb. They're going to blow up about a couple years down the line. The Saints, there's no answer right now on their team. They're in cap hell. They have a bunch of quarterbacks competing. The Falcons are lost. This could be an opportunity for the Panthers if Sam Darnold finds a way to get something going. I think this is the best case scenario for Sam Darnold. He couldn't have gone to a better team. They're going to give him opportunities, but unfortunately, I think this is an odd situation for Teddy Bridgewater. He's going to have to find his way out of town because you cannot have him sitting behind your back if you really want to believe in Sam Darnold and give him the keys to potentially restarting his career.
Look, I definitely see what the Panthers are doing here, but I still don't think he has a super high ceiling. That's just because the division around him might suck in a couple of years. So to me, it's just a big jump to make. Yeah, the Buccaneers, when Brady eventually retires, will probably decline a little bit, but they're obviously not going anywhere in the immediate future. The Falcons, I get that one. I really do. The Saints are a bit of a wild card. They had the salary cap issues, but they were pretty damn creative with it in the offseason, and they have Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill. I could see him taking a step back, but they still have a better roster than Carolina does. So assuming the Panthers pick up the 50-year option on Darnold's quarterback, he's only locked into Carolina for 2 years. So if he doesn't have a great year one, he's going to be in an incredibly high pressure situation in 2022. And the Panthers could easily be right back where they are with Bridgewater right now, where they have a number 8, number 12, somewhere like that pick, where they're just good enough not to be in position to get one of the top quarterbacks in that draft class. So to me, it's just he could improve. I know Matt Rule interviewed, I believe, with the Jets before he ended up going to Carolina. So there's a connection there too. But if you're comparing Darnold to Joe Burrow, that's just a complete insult to Joe Burrow here, right? The Panthers do have some talent at the playmaking spot, but they lost Curtis Samuel. They need to upgrade that. I think that's where they're going to go at number 8. And they have questions on the offensive line too. If they don't address that, they're going to end up having the same problems in Carolina that Darnold had with the Jets.
That's fair. I think that's fair. But then you look at it, you look at it as not just this, but I think the Sam Darnold and Joe Burrow thing could be a little bit overblown. I feel you look at Sam Darnold in this situation, it's very similar to Mitch Trubisky, right? You know, the 5th year option to where he could have had it picked up, do or die year. And then the Bears, it felt like they should have brought him back because he played well enough, but then they just let him walk. So could be a similar situation here for Sam Darnold, but he's got to go out and produce. I don't think there's anything other than that. He's got to make an impact here in year one under this new system, but he has a top 5, top 2, top 5 running back behind him. And he's got enough playmakers. They're going to take one. I believe it'll be Kyle Pitts if he's there. If he's there for Carolina, we'll get into that later. But you know what I mean? I think we all know that they're going playmaker on the outside. And that can only do wonders for him. He has Robbie Anderson there. He has DJ Moore. He has enough. It's just like you said about the offensive line. That's going to be the one thing that will have to make or break Sam Darnold in his career in Carolina.
Right. And a couple of the guys the Panthers have brought in free agency are guys off the Jets scrap heap. They brought in Pat Elflein, for example. So to me, that's not an encouraging start. I mean, obviously McCaffrey's a equalizer in terms of playmaking ability, but as a running back, no matter how creatively he's used, he can only balance the playing field so much. Now, Darnold is a talented guy, and we've talked about it before. The Jets failed him because they didn't surround him with playmakers and protection. I feel like the Panthers are more likely to do that. They spent all 7 of their draft picks last year on the defensive side of the ball. So I think we're going to see them pivot back a little bit where they're going to be more primarily on the offense, and that will definitely help. But they're going to be relying on a lot of younger players because they did lose Curtis Samuel. They did lose Mike Davis behind McCaffrey, and McCaffrey ended up missing almost all of last season. So if something like that happens again, all of a sudden the pressure's right back on Darnold without him. So it's just, I see what Carolina's doing. It could work out, but they were very clearly desperate here, and they overpaid a little bit as a result. Because frankly, I think they could have gotten Darnold for a round 3 pick.
Yeah, I mean, if the Jets tip their hand and let everyone know that that's going to be Zach Wilson, it only deflates the value of Sam Darnold, and that's something that they possibly could have done in this scenario with the rumors coming out. But you could obviously expect it, like after the pro day of Zach Wilson, they're like, okay, they just saw this man just fire a ball like 5 million yards down the field with power, and he's someone that could cut through the wind up there in the Northeast. But let's look at the Jets with their second first round pick, because we all know that Zach Wilson's going to, or at least one of the two quarterbacks there with Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson. I believe it's Zach. But anyway, you look later on in the first round. Where is one area that you think they need to improve?
I mean, there's still a lot, man. I mean, they were such a barren roster, especially on the defensive end of the defensive side of the football, under that Gase Greg Williams coaching staff nightmares. So while Robert Saleh and company have done a good job addressing some of the holes, they brought in Carl Lawson at the edge spot. They brought in Gerard Davis at the linebacker position, hopefully getting C.J. Mosley back. They brought in Corey Davis. The two that stick out to me the most right now are cornerback and running back. Corner to me is one of the 5 most important positions in football. I would not make that same claim for running backs, but I feel like running back is where the Jets are going to target with that 23rd overall pick if they stay at 23 and don't make another move, because I think Travis Etienne is going to be there. And I mean, I listened to this on Move the Sticks. Etienne has made comments about how interested the Jets seem to be. There is a lot of upside for him behind Mekhi Becton and adding a couple other guys to that offensive line. But I think those 2 positions are the most glaring needs that haven't been addressed in free agency.
I feel like the offensive line is still a big one. Like offensive guard, I feel like that could potentially be something here. And I feel like the offensive line depth in this draft is pretty decent, especially at the guard position. I feel like there's some that have some sneaky value later on. But I don't know about running back. Like they signed Tevin Coleman. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to be legit or anything, but he's still another body. They had LaMichael P. Ryan, who they drafted last year. I just don't think they use a second first round pick on a running back, and they potentially use him in the second round to where you could potentially not pay him as much money as a first round pick. And maybe ETN falls to the second, and maybe that's where they're thinking about him. But regardless, there should be enough backs to where if I see a team with this many needs, I'm not taking a running back in the first round. I don't care if you've already taken one pick. I don't think I'd reach on someone like Etienne. I'd look either corner or offensive line for sure in that pick.
Let me make sure I clarify something. I'm not saying I think the Jets should take a running back at 23. I don't. Not at all. I feel like that's what they're going to do. I feel like they want to get somebody more explosive with more juice in that offense, because as much as I like Corey Davis, to me, he's not that guy. Denzel Mims has some of that ability, but I think they are going to target a home run hitting kind of player. Somebody that can pair with Zach Wilson a little bit in terms of creating chunk plays. Because right now, I just don't really see too much of that on the roster. I agree that corner would be a better position to address, or offensive line would be a better position to address. But the Jets do have a lot of extra draft picks. They have 34th overall as well. I think they should target somebody else. In terms of the interior offensive line, I don't think it's that deep of a class behind Elijah Vera Tucker, unless they look at moving a guy like Jalen Mayfield from Michigan inside. And I do think that's a possibility at 23, because to me, he's a guard long term. So they could go for somebody like that. If they want to target a corner at 23, they could go for a guy like Greg Newsome out of Northwestern. He should still be on the board. They have a lot of options, but I don't have enough trust in the Jets yet with this front office to not overvalue a position like running back. That's where I'm at. I don't think they should go for one at 23, but I can at least see the logic if they do.
I like someone like J.C. Horn from the University of South Carolina. I feel like he'd be a solid fit in this system. The junior from South Carolina, he played pretty good football in the SEC against good competition this year. And I feel like that can only enhance what you're going to be seeing in the AFC East and potentially in the NFL. I mean, heck, he's going up against these great players in the SEC. And I think he's someone that they could target in that second first round with that second first round pick. And you talk about playmakers, and I know he's not the sexiest name, but they did bring in Keelan Cole, and he's caught a lot of deep balls throughout his career, especially in the playoffs against Pittsburgh. He had a couple of them over the shoulder. And I feel like he could potentially get a rise with someone like Zach Wilson as opposed to Sam Darnold with his skill set.
I still feel like the Jets can improve a little bit in the playmaking area. I think Keelan Cole's more of a depth player who is capable of producing in a limited role. But if they're relying on him to be a number three wide receiver, I think that might be a little steep. Now, he could be a decent security blanket. J.C. Horn, I'm sure the Jets would love to have him. I don't think there's a chance in hell he falls to 23. I think a team is going to fall in love with that confidence, that swagger that he plays with, and the physical specimen that he is. I think he's going to be a top 20 pick. So unless the Jets trade up, I don't think he will be on the board. So that's why I mentioned Newsome instead. If they wanted to wait till the second round and get one of the bigger corners, they could go for a guy like Ifitu Melifonwu out of Syracuse. They could go for an Asante Samuel Jr. if they're looking for a smaller guy. Frankly, they still have needs in the secondary, especially at corners. So if they don't take one in the first two rounds, I will be surprised, whether it's at 23 or 34.
What do you think the percentage is of the Jets trading up with that second first round pick?
I don't think it's impossible. If a premium position player ends up falling to the 12 to 15 range, maybe a Rashawn Slater type out of Northwestern, I think it would be around 20 to 25%. But unless somebody who's projected to go in the top 12 really starts to fall to within 5 to 7 picks of 23, I think the Jets will stay put or trade back and get even more picks.
Yeah, that'd be a smart approach. I was just curious on that. I feel like it's probably somewhere around the 15% if I were to guess on if they trade up. The good news about that is they do have number 34, which could potentially sway some teams as getting two and moving up for that. So it could be two first round picks essentially on that part. But I thought it's interesting with what the Jets did earlier on Monday, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do. Are you ready to get into the Giants?
Oh, yeah. If we have to ruin my good time, we can.
All right, let's get into the Giants. Right now, the New York Giants hold the 11th pick in the draft, and there are a lot of needs on this team, but not necessarily a lot. But there are still some glaring holes that need to be filled, and I think one of them is at the linebacker position. You could potentially see someone like a Micah Parsons. I like him a lot. But what do you think about the Giants' potential needs and what they need to do?
Yeah, the Giants are in an interesting spot because they ended up having a very active and aggressive free agency where they went and signed the top wide receiver and one of the top corners on the market to clearly put a hole, fill the holes of wide receiver one and cornerback two. We've talked about that for a while. All of a sudden, the Giants have addressed both of those needs before the draft even kicked in. So I think there are two main glaring spots left on this roster, which all of a sudden is decently well rounded. To me, that's on the offensive line and at the edge rusher positions. They haven't really done much to address either of those. And if they don't address them, it's going to limit the effectiveness of their other free agency moves, right? I do think linebacker is a position they'll look to target, but I don't think they're going to target it in the first two rounds. I think that they realize that the edge rusher spot and the offensive line spot are more important to build a team with, and that they're going to have options on, like they're going to have the 11th and the 42nd picks, right? I would be surprised if those two picks are not an edge rusher and an offensive lineman in one order or the other.
Someone that I saw has really jumped up on the boards that's an edge is Quiddy Payne from Michigan. Do you feel like he could be potentially a target there? I honestly don't like the guy. I think he's kind of like a Rashawn Gary, which is I know the Michigan comp there, but I feel like he's someone that shouldn't have gone in the first round, and just another defensive end that's been a little bit hyped up at the University of Michigan.
Yeah, I'm not huge on Pay. I do think he's a first round talent. He's a great athlete. I just don't think he would be a great fit for the Giants scheme. Personally, I would rather address the offensive line at 11 because all of the moves that the Giants have made, and I know that they took Andrew Thomas at 4 last year, but they still have. I mean, first of all, he had a pretty terrible rookie season, especially in the first half. Nate Solder is a 1 year stopgap at best if he starts at right tackle. Matt Parrott is a complete unknown. And the Giants' interior offensive line, the guard spots, with Will Hernandez and Shane Lemieux now penciled in as the starters, if those two are the best that the Giants are going to throw out there at offensive guard, they're fucked. I mean, let's just be honest here. So they could draft a guy like Rashawn Slater if he falls. I feel like he's a possibility to be there at 11. But I think the Giants are going to be targeting an edge rusher instead. Just knowing Gettleman, he wanted Brian Burns a couple drafts ago. He went 1 pick earlier to the Panthers. We ended up with Dexter Lawrence, going back to him fapping to defensive tackles again, right? But the Giants, I'm not saying I completely disagree with the needing an edge rusher. We do. The last couple of years, the Giants have managed to get decent production out of Marcus Golden and Kyler Fackrell, but they have yet to truly address that position. So I think if they stay at number 11, Jalen Phillips will be their guy. To me, he's the top edge rusher in the class. I think he's a better scheme fit under Patrick Graham than Kwity Paye would be. But personally, if we're going to take an offensive lineman, or excuse me, an edge rusher in the first round, I don't think it's a super strong edge class. I would rather trade back into the 18, 20, 22 range. Maybe Phillips is still there. They could get Kwity Paye at that point. It would make a little bit more sense. Go for an Azeez Ojulari. That's kind of where my head's at.
Yeah, I love Ojulari, and I know we're talking a lot of players here and what we're doing, but we'll get into most of that later. But I feel like at this spot, I want edge. I want edge 100% at this spot because, I mean, there's only so many. You talk about how it potentially is not that like the talent is there's not one guy that's like, oh my gosh, I got to get this edge rusher. It's more of a collective group of solid football players, and I think that could benefit as long as you scout the right guy. But you look at the team, and we talked about this multiple times on this show. The Giants have never been able to find a pass rusher for a very long time. It's been a while since they've had a consistent pass rush that gets home. And you look at the elite defenses in the league, they have the pass rush that gets home. You look at the team like the Vikings last year that didn't have that pass rush. Harrison Smith had one of his worst years, but that's because he can't guard everybody for a long time. So a pass rush is so important in football, and they have enough to where they can stop the run. They get some pressure with their big boys in the middle that, as you speak about Gettleman, what he likes to do with defensive tackles. But you look at the edge position, that's where I feel like you have to attack it with your first pick and hit on that pick because they haven't had a pass rusher in a long time.
No, they haven't. But I would also flip that and say there's a couple reasons. So while I don't deny that edge rusher is a need, and I fully expect and want the Giants to address it in the first 2 rounds, the NFL passing game is so quick. Edge rushers are less and less likely to even get to the quarterback. So I think we're starting to see it be more important for defensive tackles to collapse the pocket from the inside. So defensive ends can go right around and get to the quarterback. Otherwise, the ball's going to be out before they can get there. Essentially, where I'm at is you mentioned that the defensive end class is not super, like, not loaded on star power, right? There's not a Chase Young type in this year's draft. But if the Giants are picking one at 11th overall, I'd want somebody with star potential. I don't want to reach for a high floor player. They tried that with Eric Flowers and Eli Apple a couple years ago at 9th and 10th, and look at how that worked out. It was just a nightmare. So if they're going to miss, I'd at least rather swing for the fences on a guy with elite upside. And I don't see that with Kwity Paye. I don't see that necessarily with Ojulari, at least at 11. I'd rather trade down first. But the offensive line class, there are a couple good offensive tackles, and a couple of them could end up playing guard. The Giants could easily pick one of them at 11. They could go for Elijah Vera Tucker at 11, who to me is by far the best guard in the class. And then they could go for a really high ceiling pass rusher like a Jason Oweh in round 2 and try to kill two birds with one stone, because the last time they really hit on a pass rusher was Jason Pierre-Paul. And I know he was a first round pick, but similar to Oweh, he was an athletic freak without a lot of college production. So that's kind of where my head is at.
Yeah, I like that. I think it makes a lot of sense on what they do. So going forward on this Giants team, is there one more spot that you want to potentially look at for this team?
Yeah, I mean, I would still look to get a little bit of running back insurance late in the draft with a sixth or seventh round pick. Take a flyer on somebody in case Saquon's not 100%, or if Devontae Booker gets hurt again. You mentioned linebacker at the beginning. I do think the Giants will look at that outside linebacker spot as well, or even next to Blake Martinez. They did bring in Reggie Ragland for a year, and they still have Tay Crowder, who was better than expected for the Mr. Irrelevant pick as a rookie, but and I don't, again, that's not an insult. He was the last pick of the draft and he ended up being a relatively productive pro, but you can't expect him to turn into an all-star either, right? So I could see him looking at linebacker in the mid to late rounds. I definitely want them to take at least one interior offensive lineman to fill one of those guard spots as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on the offensive or the outside linebacker help. I mean, that the thing that's crazy is we're talking about a strength of this Giants team is their defense, right? And we're talking about using a first round pick potentially on that defense. And I mean, it's a great defense. You look at that division, the NFC East. There's not a lot of solid offense in that division right now on paper. Like what are the Eagles going to be with Hurts? It's going to be a lot of stopping the run. So that's where you need that outside guy to potentially break away the big game from Miles Sanders on the outside. He's more of an outside runner. Jalen Hurts on an option. If you have someone that's athletic and quick, that could be someone that stops a team like that. Dak, I feel like, isn't going to move around as much. You don't know what Washington's going to do in the future going forward. But I just feel like the Giants are the most complete team in that division right now.
I think they also have the lowest ceiling, at least in other than maybe the Eagles in the immediate term, because we all know Washington's defense is legit. Excuse me, is legit, and I know Dallas's offense is going to be good if Prescott stays healthy and they get their offensive line back, as the Cowboys have the weapons. So I guess where I'd be at, the Giants last year did not really have a true pass rusher, and they still had a top 10 or top 12 defense because they were able to scheme pressure from being so good in the back end. And if anything, if everyone's healthy, their secondary should be better this year. They brought in Adoree Jackson. They have Darnay Holmes, who was solid as a rookie in the slot, who should only continue to improve. They have what hopefully will be a full season of Xavier McKinney at the safety spot, along with Logan Ryan and Jabril Peppers. So I do agree that they need to get a better pass rusher, but I think the Giants defense is more likely to hold up without drafting one at 11 than the Giants offense is to hold up without taking a good offensive lineman that early.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good point on that part. But I feel like the Giants, I mean, they're just a solid team this year. I think that they have enough pieces. They spent they might have overpaid on a few guys, let's be honest there. But I think going into this season, the draft is going to be huge. If they can nail at least 50% of their picks for this season and get production and starting production out of them, I feel like they're going to be solid going forward. But
60% of the time, it works every time.
yeah, that's a good quote. What's that from?
Anchorman.
Nice, nice. Good quote there. Anchorman on the show. But anyway, we're going to get into the Chicago Bears, and boy, are they a mess. I mean, we could literally sit here until we literally are gray in the face, like 50 years down the line, talking about how many issues the Bears have. So let's start with the main one, which is quarterback. Like, look, they came out and said Andy Dalton is an upgrade. So I don't know what kind of tape they watched in Dallas with the great weapons he had there, but the weapons aren't there in Chicago, and they think he's an upgrade. So kudos to Ryan Pace for thinking that. But you look at Andy Dalton right now, he's someone that's just he could barely play the position. He's going to be mediocre at best. So you have to look at the draft for another quarterback. And believe it or not, Ryan Pace is probably going to be taking another quarterback in this year's draft.
Yeah, God, the Bears are a weird team, man. We could go back to that from last year when I said the Bears had the weirdest offseason of any NFL team. You might be able to make that argument again. I don't understand why they operate their football team this way, man. I'm just baffled by it. Andy Dalton might be slightly better than Nick Foles or Mitch Trubisky. That's your best case scenario, right? He's not going to all of a sudden even be the player he was in Cincinnati, much less turn into Aaron Rodgers. So it's just, to me, a one-year stopgap who will not elevate the play of the people around him, right? And that kind of defeats the whole purpose, in my opinion. But the Bears are also they currently have the 20th pick in the draft. They might be able to trade up somewhere in the 8 to 12 range to get whichever of the five main quarterbacks is still available if they're that desperate. But I feel like they would rather try to get a top end quarterback either in a future draft or if a Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson is available on the trade market in the future. So to me, they're in a weird spot. They were just good enough last year to sneak into the playoffs as an 8-8 team. And now they're not in a great draft position to get a quarterback in the first round unless they invest some major future capital. And we saw the 49ers move up from 12 to 3, and it cost them 2 future first round picks. So the cost of a QB is not cheap, right? I just, I mean, wouldn't it be a Chicago move to trade up to number 8 and with Carolina and get Mac Jones now?
Oh my gosh, it would. It would. I absolutely, and I wouldn't be shocked one bit. So I'm going to go out on a limb right here, 12:53 a.m. on April 6th, 2021. I'm making this statement in the Florida room. We're doing this podcast here because I don't have the green screen behind me. Spring break. Regardless, I'm laying out the land because this is a bold statement. The Chicago Bears will not make the playoffs in the next 10 years. They're going to miss the playoffs for a decade. So here it is right now. I'm saying it to you. My name's Dylan Kearns. This is April 6th, 2021. Look at this in 2031, and I'm going to pull this one from the archives. That's how bad this franchise is. Ryan Pace doesn't know what he's doing. Matt Nagy's going to be gone at the end of this season, and there's just so much shambles going on with this team. I cannot believe it. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, they need wide receiver help. They need corner help. Their offensive line isn't good. Their defense, I mean, oh my gosh, I'm just so lost. Akeem Hicks could potentially be out if they're trying to cut more cap space. It's just an absolute disaster.
Yeah, well, first of all, we're going to need to get freezing cold takes to get just to be ready for you on that one in case they sneak in at 8-8 in 2027 to make you look like an idiot.
2020, I love that.
You can see that happening, right? But I do think the Bears are in a very precarious spot long term at the moment, where they might be forced to fully tear things down before they can build it back up. Which would, if that does happen, would keep them out of the playoffs for at least 4 or 5 seasons. And if they turn into the Browns, then it could be 10. I mean, we could go back through their quarterback history and laugh at how stupid they are with the Kyle Ortons and Rex Grossmans and Cade McNowns of the world. And the fact that Jay Cutler's been their best quarterback the last 15 years. So I mean, it's just, that's pretty funny. And then the Trubisky pick, which is Ryan Pace's defining moment, right? But you mentioned most of them. I think there are 5 main premium positions on an NFL roster, and that's quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, edge rusher, and cornerback. And the Bears, I think, have questions at all 5. So it's just not a good spot to be in. They have questions at the supposed strength points on their defense, with Akeem Hicks possibly not coming back. They already lost Roy Robertson Harris at defensive tackle. So, and they don't have, they at least have some draft picks this year. They didn't trade their first rounders in this year's draft like they have the last couple, but they don't even have a high end pick in these rounds. So I just think they're unlikely to get elite talent. They might hit on 1 or 2 guys, but it won't solve all their roster issues overnight. Allen Robinson's not going to be around forever. They gave him the franchise tag, but he's eventually going to force his way out. Basically, the Bears haven't invested enough in these premium positions. And when they have invested, it hasn't worked out for the most part. So that's not a good recipe for success.
And Allen Robinson, he must have had something wrong with his head. He must have been on something when he went and signed that contract that says, yeah, I'm going to sign this franchise tag and play for this team with Andy Dalton because I believe it's an upgrade too. Like, no, there's no chance that Allen Robinson is trying to, I don't know what the heck he was thinking. Like, he could have got paid. He could have forced his way out, but then he'd be a diva in 2 cities instead of just 1. But you look at this team and going forward, the Chicago Bears, yeah, shout out to Jacksonville on that one. But the Bears going forward, I mean, it wouldn't shock me one bit. I mean, this is the most Bears thing ever. We're having this conversation next year on how bad the management was, how bad the season was. They'd trade 2 first round picks for like a Derek Carr or someone like that. It just wouldn't be it's just crazy. But anyway, let's look at number 11, okay? We look at, not 11, they're at 20. They're at 20. You look at 20, 11 was the Giants. But anyway, you look at 20 for the Bears. I mean, I could potentially see offensive line here. I could also see corner, like literally all 5. We have no idea what we're thinking here. I see someone like a Samuel Cosme, that offensive lineman. I feel like he could be a solid fit, but then again, I mean, where do you begin on this team? Where do you spend in the first round pick on?
Yeah, that's a tough question. The Bears, I feel like, are going to try to get a long-term wide receiver to replace Robinson when he goes. I'm not saying that's what I would do. I think it's what the Bears are going to do unless they trade up for Mac Jones. I could see them going for a Kadarius Toney or a Rashad Bateman at number 20. If they decide to address the offensive line, I could see him going for a Christian Darrisaw if he falls. I think 20 would be a little rich for Cosme personally, but if they took him in the second round, where I think he could still be available, I at least understand the logic. The Bears haven't invested a first round pick in the offensive line since Gabe Carimi in 2011, or at least, excuse me, an offensive tackle since 2011. So I could see them ending that drought here. Frankly, they're lucky Charles Leno has been as decent as he's been because he was a seventh round pick. And I mean, the fact that he's panned out into a serviceable NFL tackle is great, but it's not a great formula in terms of going forward. You can expect to find a decent seventh rounder every 5 years, right? I mean, the Giants had Bobby Hart a few years back, and he's been overpaid for the Bengals, but we're just kind of nitpicking here. So I could see them going one of those two directions. I think they're going to try to surround Dalton with their first round pick, whether it's with protection or a playmaker, going back to that same argument. And then in the second round, I think they're going to try to address the cornerback spot because they lost Kyle Fuller as a cap casualty, and he went to the Broncos. So a similar name. I think they might go after Afitu Melifonwu from Syracuse because he's a bigger corner who might fit their scheme well. He's a very good zone corner, and I think the Bears are planning to run a lot of zone coverages again. So I could see him being on the board at what they got in the second round, 52, 54, something like that. I think he would be a good target at that range. They just have so many holes and so many premium positions like we talked about, and they can only address so many of them. So I they are so uninspiring to me.
David Kaplan from ESPN 1000 Chicago says he last year in the draft, and I right now I believe him. Last year in the draft, I remember listening to him before going up towards it. He liked two players from the University of Notre Dame with their first second round pick that they had, which was the first pick they had in the draft. He liked Cole Kmet, who they got. He was his number two favorite. But before that, he wanted Chase Claypool, who had a breakout season his rookie year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if that pick would have been Claypool, I see why he liked him. He liked him number one to be that guy that he wanted the Bears to take. I mean, he has the size, he has the athleticism, similar to an Allen Robinson. We could have been sitting here not worrying about that. Like you still have Jimmy Graham at your tight end position. You could get by at that position, but your tight end isn't going to win you a Super Bowl. Now, it could be argued that the wide receiver wouldn't either, but I feel like a wide receiver is a bigger game changer than a tight end that's could be a work in progress. So someone like a Claypool has stepped in right away and played well with Big Ben, who didn't have an arm for half the season. Still did a fantastic job of getting down the field. But now they're going to have to take a wide receiver with their first round pick because they screwed the pooch like they do multiple years in a row. So I think they go Kadarius Toney with this pick. It just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I'm frankly not huge on him, but I think a team is going to draft him in the first round, and it definitely could be the Bears. He's more of a high ceiling player than a Rashad Bateman is, who's more of a high floor guy. In fairness, Ryan Pace did bring in Allen Robinson. It's got to be his best free agency move, but they've also made so many baffling choices on the rest of the offense and on most of the defense too. If we look at pass rusher for a second, they got Khalil Mack, which I still understand and like for the most part, but one of the consequences is last year they only had two picks in the top 150 of the draft, and they pissed away one of them on Kmet, who does not play a premium position, right? The other one was Jalen Johnson, who I liked at the time, I still like, but they need another corner across from him, and he was the only premium position guy they took in the first 4.5 rounds of the draft. I like I mentioned, I like Darnell Mooney a lot. I still do. I think he was a good sleeper, but I also think he's at his best at a number two wide receiver. So it's just even their hits don't fully address the needs is I guess what I'm getting at there, right? So Khalil Mack is eventually going to be included in a trade for a quarterback if they don't move up for Mac Jones, right? I could see that happening. If they really end up with a Russell Wilson, Mac's gone. If they end up with any veteran QB that a team is going to be forced to trade, it's It's just so fucking, it's so exhausting, and
I could I could
uh,
see them. Okay,
offensive
finish.
line, really quick. If they end up going there at 20, you mentioned a couple Notre Dame guys. I don't think it's out of the question they go for Eichenberg. I really like the idea of Tevin Jenkins out of Oklahoma State as well at that pick. I think they're going to start by trying to surround Andy Dalton with as much talent as possible and then addressing the defensive side of the ball afterwards. But the, I still think they have one of the weirdest, most uninspiring rosters in the NFL. And I think their best case scenario is to finish they're 17 games now, 7-10, 8-9, right? Maybe they sneak into the playoffs in a bad NFC again if they're extremely lucky. I think the more realistic scenario is they finally bottom out, go 4-13, and finally have that reality check be waiting for them in the offseason next year.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think they make the playoffs for the next decade, but going forward, I could see Ryan Pace picking up his phone and calling up a place that he called up last offseason, the Jacksonville Jaguars, trying to get someone like a Gardner Minshew, who could be a younger project that you could potentially put behind someone like Andy Dalton, but it would just be like if you go back to Jacksonville, who wasn't good, they didn't win a game last year with Minshew, but he looked okay his first season. But regardless, he's more athletic, a better version than a Nick Foles, which is why Jacksonville elected to keep Minshew instead of Foles. I mean, that's backtracking on what you're doing. You're calling the same team twice for their backup quarterback. And it's an absolute disaster. But I feel like that could potentially be a move that he likes because he's going to cost cheap and he's someone that's younger and could potentially get some sort of playing time in Chicago.
Unless he keeps Foles around because he's basically stuck with his contract for another year, right? With the defensive end spot, regardless of what ends up happening, even if Khalil Mack continues to be the elite pass rusher that he is, I still am completely baffled by the move to let Leonard Floyd go to bring in Robert Quinn on a bigger contract. I didn't understand that at the time, and it still confuses the living hell out of me now. And hindsight's 2020, but I think regular sight should have caught that one. It didn't make sense then. It doesn't make sense now, and it didn't work. So that it's another question mark at a premium position. Robert Quinn, to me, good player in his career, but overpaid, declining veteran. It just limits the Bears financially. It limits them on the field. It limits them somewhat in the future as well. They have a lot of good pieces on that defense, despite all of their flaws. They could be a top 10 to 15 defense at the very worst if they stay healthy and if they address that cornerback spot to replace Kyle Fuller. They have good safeties, especially. They have a pretty good linebacking core. And if they bring back Akeem Hicks, they still have a pretty good defensive line. But that offense is incredibly uninspiring. As good as Allen Robinson is, I understand why he signed that tender because he wants to make sure he gets paid, no holdout drama, and he could still get traded, like we mentioned before with Jarvis Landry after he signed his tag. There is a precedent there. But the offensive line does not have many premium resources invested into it. I do like the improvements that Cody Whitehair made. I still think James Daniels could be a good piece, but wide receiver Anthony Miller didn't work out. And I still think they overvalued Cole Kmet last year. I wasn't huge on the tight end class in general, and they took one with their first pick. David Montgomery improved in the second half of the season, so they might have a solid running back. But that offensive line to me has limited upside. They need help at the tackle spots because Massey is probably on his way out as well. And then that wide receiver elephant in the room. They have so many holes at the biggest positions in football, and it's going to take them multiple years to address them all. And that's if they hit on the players they bring in.
Yeah, and you look, I liked how you brought up Eichenberg earlier, and it has the ties. I think the offensive line coach with Chicago was with Notre Dame, and that's how you saw players like Sam Mustipher and Alex Bars come over. You put Eichenberg on that line, it would be so interesting. Back-to-back picks being from the University of Notre Dame on that line. You have Cole Kmet, the first one on the tight end. I mean, you want to send Chicago into just shambles. I mean, Eichenberg might be legit. But if they take another person from the University of Notre Dame in the first round with their first pick, people are going to be absolutely pissed as long as, like, obviously you got to make sure that that person performs, but they're going to be like, are you kidding me? Is that the only place we draft from? Like Jacksonville with their track record of people from Florida. I mean, it's Tyson Alualu, it's Jalen Ramsey, it's a Florida put Taven Bryan. I mean, they swing and miss in
DJ
every Florida.
Henderson.
DJ Henderson, Jawan Taylor. It doesn't end. But I mean, everybody drafts like that, and if the Bears start doing that trend, it literally reminds me of how Dave Caldwell was when he first got to Jacksonville and started making all these little moves. And they're sort of contralateral because there's so many needs on the team. You spend money on washed up old free agents, and then you draft so poorly from one school, and it just absolutely does not work. So I think that's where the Bears are heading. They're heading to a long rebuild starting next season.
I could definitely see it. And I meant back when we talked about the Giants I'd prefer they take if like a big swing at 11 rather than a high floor player. If the Bears are going to pick a guy like Eichenberg, who to me is a day one starter, but doesn't have a super high ceiling, it's a similar thing there. They're going to take a guy like him to try to salvage the spot right away, but limit the future upside. And it'll just be adding to that can of worms where they're trying to just salvage the position where it's eventually going to screw them over. Right. And it's not going to allow them to ever build a team that could go 12-5 in a season. I just don't see that right now. So that's why if they go for an offensive player, I'd prefer it's somebody with a higher ceiling rather than a higher floor. But even if they go for somebody like that, I mean, that's going to be somebody who probably won't contribute all that much in year one. And the Bears are clearly operating under the asinine assumption that they think they're going to be playoff contenders going forward with this core. I just don't see that. Even if they do sneak into the playoffs again, I don't think anyone's going to confuse them for a threat to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, absolutely not. The Bears Super Bowl isn't happening anytime soon. Playoffs, I don't think so. You said potentially, but anyway, that's going to wrap it up for today. We got some draft talk happening. We have more of it coming up here on the Big City Sports Podcast. We're going to get into some first round mocks. We're going to dive into our players, what we like. The big boards will be coming out, and a lot more of that coming up. NHL trade deadline. We're going to recap that next week, and we'll get into that as well. But for this one, check us out everywhere. We're at Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You see us on YouTube. You could also and Slig, you got to add one more thing. What's that?
I do. Poll question of the week: who won the Sam Darnold trade, Jets or Panthers?
All right. Poll question of the week makes a return. I don't think we've done one in a little while, but who wins the Sam Darnold trade? That's going to be that. Check that out on Twitter, Big City Sports PD. But until next time, we're out everywhere. Subscribe, leave a review, all that good stuff. Comment. We'll try to bring that up on the show. But until next time, I am Dylan Kearns with the Slig, and we're the Big City Sports Podcast.